of those that are in charge not willing to really call the pandemic over yet. So it'll be interesting to see what that all entails.
Yeah, for us, we've been really watching and listening to the epidemiologists, the people who are basically kind of walking us through this, and our guidance and direction has been fundamentally coming as they move from the high to moderate to low, whatever it is they're doing. But the House bill was approved, and I guess my concern is going to be is that when they say it's done, okay, what does that mean? It's done. I mean, does it mean we no longer get input? We don't have to have I mean, I don't know what done means or end game means. So I'll be sending the county health department some questions tonight. Hopefully we'll get some feedback, but it may very well be that without any guidance coming to us, what do we do? I mean, it's like they're saying it's over, move on back to normal. And I kind of thought we were just not quite there yet. So obviously more information to find out, but I found that somewhat interesting, that announcement today.
I agree. Yeah, there are a lot of agencies that don't necessarily line up with that. So yeah. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Steve.
Yeah, sorry, I was concentrating on other things, so I forgot to just say hi rather than wave. So
that's fine. Yeah.
Looks like we all need to be where Ann is.
Yeah, she sent me a text indicating that she's enjoying a ball game. So I'm absolutely confident that she's multitasker. She can watch the family play ball and at the same time be part of this work session. So we're pretty excited for her.
Hey, if I would have known Ann was going to do that, I wouldn't have left the Roy High Senior baseball game.
I'll just tell you, Joe, you got to set your priorities.
I'm out of here. Have a good day.
I got to have 3 of you. So I'm telling you, I need 3.
If we did teams, I could easily transfer it to my phone and I'd be out.
And she found a way, and as you can tell from her smiling face with earplugs, not only has she watched the game and route her team onto victory, but you also listen to the work session. So she's gonna multitask on us today.
Joe, you should know baseball's easy enough to multitask. There's not much going on.
Well, I figured the problem is there's not much time between this meeting and council meeting, and so I would find myself driving home within like a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Is that coming from a soccer professional, that particular advice?
Well, you know, baseball, it's kind of like football. It's down, set, hike, work for 30 seconds and have a 40-second break. And then baseball's pitch, wait 30 seconds, pitch, wait 30, you know.
There you go.
We're okay. Soccer, basketball, it's continuous.
We're coming up on 4:30. We want to basically get ready to jump in. So, okay, thank you. UTA trustee Holbrook, appreciate you joining us. Thank you. It looks like we've got a quorum and it looks like we're ready to jump in. So thank you for joining us. We've got 1 hour before our city council meeting, so we have some things we'd like to punch through. Let me first do a roll call. Again, welcome everybody. Roll call. We have, I think Julia's iPad is Brian. I think he's coming online now. Jan Burrell notified us that she has a school board meeting conflict, so she won't be with us tonight. We have Councilmember Wilson, Councilmember Jackson, and Councilmember Paul with us. So we do have a quorum. and we can go ahead and get ready to start. Let me, if I can, read the statement in terms of our electronic meetings. I, Mayor Robert Dandoy, in accordance with Utah Code Section 52-3-2074, have determined that conducting a meeting of the Roy City Council chambers presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who would be present at the City Council chambers. The basis of this determination is due to the infectious nature and potentially dangerous health effects of contracting the COVID-19 virus. There is not sufficient space in the council chambers to provide an appropriate safe physical distancing for the safety of individuals who would attend. Accordingly, on this date, May 4th, 2021 at 4:30, this meeting will be held electronically without an anchor position. I should indicate to you, Roy City, as of April 30th, Roy City has 38 active cases. And today, Weber County is still in the moderate transmission index rate. Okay, so with that, I will indicate to you seems to be some changes coming. I was talking to Councilmember Wilson earlier about those changes that are being announced in the news. Not sure what that means, but that could very well be the last time I will read that statement. Well, after today.
Does that have to do with the end game legislation?
Correct. And we're just, I need to send some information to the county to kind of understand a little better what that means. But they're indicating we meet the standards of House Bill 294. And as a result of that, they're saying that now as of next Tuesday, the pandemic endgame bill is enacted. That means all health orders, both the local and state, will end on Tuesday. That's what the news reports.
I did read that they are letting some counties and cities continue on with restrictions in buildings, city or county-owned buildings.
Yeah, I just need to get the understanding, particularly that's the reason why I'm going to reach out to the county to find out what the county is going to propose. Our interest, obviously, is we look to the experts in the medical industry to guide us. If they pull the cork, it doesn't leave us a lot of options. So more to come on that. Steve, I believe you're up. Let's go ahead and we'll continue the conversation. And then we've got UTA. As I mentioned, we appreciate you joining us. Shirley, any input or comments you'd like to share with us? Beth, you're surely welcome to do that. Steve?
Okay. As mentioned in the staff report, the council had asked that I make some changes to kind of our ordinance. So I've done that. Most of it, again, was dealing with the heights of buildings. After our discussion, we kind of came to the conclusion of some areas are okay to be 40, some okay to be 60, and some, to go on there. So the map here kind of indicates that. The red stripe, which is north of 4,000, we talked about it being 60 feet tall. The green area, again striped, would be 40 feet tall, knowing that when it abuts up against residential, especially back to back, then our ordinance kicks in on setbacks and stepping of buildings and stuff like that to help protect those residents. In between the tracks on the south end and the rail trail, it was discussed again to help not just the homes that back onto the railroad, but the homes that back onto the trail, that it doesn't dominate them as well, to leave it 40 feet. I put 40, I think the discussion was between 35 and 40. I just picked 40 just for discussion's sake, but again, it's something we can discuss and modify as going. The blue area, which is mostly the downhill portion, we put 60 feet. And then on the, well, it was called the Roy Innovation Center, but I don't want it to be confused with MIDA, which is part of Falcon Hill, which calls it the Roy Innovation Center. So I kept it similar to our zoning. Now it says Business Park. So some of the changes as well was changing it from station area core, station area general, to station north, which would be the red, station south, which is the green, and station central, which is the blue. And then of course the orange would be business park. Again, it was more just for, so there wasn't any confusion when you hear somebody in the paper or whatever say the Roy Innovation Center, and some people think, well, which one is it and what does it have to do with that? And so keeping it business park. The tables that were part of the staff report just reflected those changes in height. Again, in blue is those areas that we'd be adding on to the existing tables. So height was the main issue.
Hey, Steve, I do have a question on that. Go back,
Okay.
scroll back up to the map. Because we had talked to several of the people that live on, I can't see the road, but yeah, basically right there. And we had talked about limiting that to 3 stories. And so when we were talking 35 feet, to me, that was, you know, there's not a definition that a story is 10 feet.
Right.
The thought on 35 feet is that basically limits you to pretty much 3 stories. I know you chose to go to 40. I would probably request, and it's up to the rest of the council, that we stay no higher than 35 feet where it backs up to those houses on the other side.
And
of the
again,
track.
that's a discussion you guys will have to do. It. I picked 40 again because if they went 3 stories, you say 10 to 12 foot per story. You know, if it's 12 feet, they're at 36 plus some areas to do a parapet to screen all their mechanical equipment. That's kind of why I went with the taller one, just to allow for some screening of stuff. But if it's 35 feet, then it's 35 feet if that's what the council so desires. But again, the ordinance already says that after, you know, you get a 25, I think it's 20 or 25 foot setback, and then you can go up certain distance, then your buildings have to step back, and then you can go up to the regular height. So there was already.
I would propose behind those houses that it stays at 30, no more than 35 feet.
So even in between the track.
I like, yes, I have some elevations that I've done, and I unfortunately can't show them, but I can kind of talk to you about. But is this the time you want us to go ahead and talk about heights again, Steve, or did you have more of your presentation?
No,
because
most of our conversation was dealing initially with height.
Okay.
I don't remember too much, you know, setbacks on a private road. You know, it's really up to them. On a public road, we can talk about those type of things, but the initial really was height. And that was what most of our conversation was.
So I agree with Joe that we should do 35, and I think we ought to even look at a couple of the other height differences. If you take a look at the blue section, the blue stars, if you go from the area, the down side of the hill, the west side, to the east side of the blue, most of those places are around.
Sorry, Diane, we're losing you.
Pardon?
We kind of lost your.
Okay. Most of those places are 20 to 30 foot of a drop on elevation. Now, there's one place that there is a 50-foot drop. And if you look at that place just east of the blue, the green area, most of those elevation drops where we were talking 40, but I think 35 would definitely be better. Most of those elevation drops are around 20 feet. You got 15 foot to 20. There's one area with 30-foot drop. And so I think that 35 would definitely be a better approach there when you look at the actual drops. And then I had a question, Steve. You had talked about trying to back into some height elevations. So when we're talking about these 60-foot heights and things like that, where are we asking the people to measure from? Because if you measure it from the tracks, that's a lot different than measuring 60 foot from the middle of the blue section or 35 feet, you know, from the setback from the fence of the people.
All measurements are generally from grade. So
And
depending
so
on
which
how they've
section of the grade?
Yeah, so depending on how they've graded it, again, on the east side of the green area, as it starts sloping, you're going to get a grade change. You're gonna
Yes,
go from 0 to, you know, at 20 feet, you might be 10 feet lower, then you're going up. So it's not from the top grade, it's wherever the building starts and then you go.
yes.
So
So I guess
again,
that's what I'm saying is that some of that grade only drops 15 feet. Some of the grade drops 20 feet in that green section above the blue, east of the blue. And so the same thing happens in the blue section. So
mhm.
60 foot is a really big difference if you're measuring it in the middle of the blue versus near the tracks. And you had talked about trying to come up with some sort of a staggered thing, or maybe we can have actually an elevation and say so many feet, as long as it doesn't go above a certain elevation, possibly. I mean, I'm just exploring some ideas. I know, but when I went to check those elevations at great length, I was surprised that there was so many areas that had such a short drop. You know, it really didn't have as much drop on a lot of those areas as I had originally thought.
Yeah, the thought of kind of like with Salt Lake, and again, I haven't looked at their ordinance to see if that's really true that, you know, altitude, you know, X foot altitude is where your limit is. That would be difficult to write unless I could find it somewhere else. And that's why I went 60 in the blue, because if you start at 0.0 of where the green is and we drop 20 feet, this building's really only going to be 40 feet from there. And if I have a 35-foot building, the 40 foot's not going to be obtrusive more than the building in the green. So that's kind of when I went 60. But again, as I mentioned, I'm not married to the heights. I just gave us you know, kind of went for a number that we were generally talking about and put it in there. You know, if the green changes to 35, then the, you know, changes to 35, and we may have to relook at the blue and move it down a few feet as well.
I would propose the green stay at 35. I would like to hear, and I don't know if this is appropriate, Mayor, I would like to hear from Beth on, you know, I believe the blue is UTA's property. I'd like
Most
to
of it.
hear what their vision or their requirements are for this TOD area to better help us make our decision on that.
And just so you know, Joe, some of the green east of the blue is UDOT or UTA's property as well.
Yeah, the preponderance of it is, of the blue right there, is in fact all UTA. But there is a piece of that green to the east that does involve the UTA, and that's the buffer area between the residential units up on the hill and that particular area. Now, recognize a big piece of that blue right now is in fact parking lot, but that can change depending on whatever UTA has an interest in, however the city council changes the code. So the request was, Beth, are you or anyone interested in maybe making some comments on this at this point?
I would be happy to, Mayor. I just wanted to wait and make sure that that was where the flow of the conversation was going. So if I could maybe take a little bit of liberty to get some perspective, and then I can maybe address some more immediate questions. And again, I'm happy. You can throw any question at me and I'll do my best. So when we look at some of our transit-oriented development, and we look at it throughout our entire system, and one of the key things that we have had a lot of feedback on throughout the entire system, so through all 81 cities and 6 counties, one of the biggest things that people have been talking about is the housing component and how can we maximize housing in order to make them somewhat more affordable. And I use that word with quotations. Unfortunately, right now, we all know that that's a bit of a challenge, to say the least. And there's been several key pieces of legislation that have really wanted to try to address housing in some format. And one of the things that I'm sure you guys are familiar with, this came from a couple of years ago, but this was Senate Bill 34, sorry. And that really talked about the what cities are required to do for moderate housing. And that goal was simply to identify areas where there could be some ability to say, yes, this is where we ideally as a community would say, this is where we want our affordable housing to be. And then legislation this year, Senate Bill 217, which was the Htrz legislation, and that stands for Housing Transit Redevelopment Zones. And those are really, that legislation from this session is really designed to have a capture format to get some of the sales tax capturing and use that as an incentive to get a developer to come in there with the outside of that to be create affordable housing for this community. And the goal for us, as we have seen it for legislatively, is we have to balance what your community's needs are with the reality that if in order to maximize the infrastructure of rail specifically, but also other areas, we want to make sure that there's density. And I know that's the D word is kind of tricky, but we really want to make sure that there is maximum access to opportunities, is the term I guess we could use, to really highlight and get people to where they need to go. The goal, of course, access to transit means perhaps they only need one vehicle instead of two. Perhaps there can be some changes in terms of the number of parking unit requirements. There's a lot of things that have some fluidity if you have that ability to create these types of more higher units, I guess. I know that this one is at 60 feet in the blue, and that is something that UTA is definitely interested in. We want to make sure that we are doing both. We want to listen to what your community needs are. We recognize and totally acknowledge you are not Salt Lake City, but at the same time, we all share this housing challenge. And so what can we do within your community to really address it to the best of our ability based on what we have today and what your ordinances are, which is why we're having this discussion. And we would like to see there be an element that has this level of density, that it has the ability to do mixed use, which is allowing the developers to have greater control in terms of, could they do, say, a market or, a childcare center or a coffee shop, whatever they're looking to do to kind of create this more in designed community, if you will, so that they don't have to go too far to get access to services. So I'm happy to talk more about anything else, but I just kind of wanted to put that out there and see if there's other questions that I could address specifically. But again, ideally, we wanted to have the really seamless blend between your needs as a community and the system's needs, if you will.
Good comments. Thank you. Okay. Council, any thoughts?
I have
Diane?
some questions for Beth, if that's all right, Beth. Thank you. I was just wondering if you had any interested partners at this time for your property. I'll kind of just say what my questions are right now. One, the second, kind of what your time projection might be for this. And third, how would you address parking? Because most of your area there, what kind of a parking would you address for those that live there versus those that are commuting, because they would need parking structures. And then fourth would be maybe previous verbal agreements, any previous or other verbal agreements you'd made with neighborhoods. I've had several phone calls about UTA's agreements that they've had to neighbors in that area. So those are my first four questions. Thanks.
Okay. I'll address them in order. So number one, we do not have anyone interested in this location, but let me tell you why. So back in 2018, when they changed the governance structure for us and created these full-time trustees, one of the elements to that was to create a TOD model that we call the station area plan that basically says, here's what this community wants to do and UTA wants to do. Here's this joint agreement, if you will. Here's what the land use and the zoning will be. Here's what the footprint should look like. And that has to be an agreed upon element. So that has to come before the local advisory council, which in your area is represented by Mayor Call of Pleasant View. And what we want to do with that is we want to say, okay, local advisory council, here's what Roy City wants. Do we all have an agreement that this is meeting the needs of UTA and the community? Yes, is the answer to that, because we want to work closely with you to get it to that phase. And then we go back and we put it out to RFP, and then we find those developers. And I will tell you candidly that there are plenty of developers who are looking to do these types of projects. There's some more interested than others, and it depends on several elements. Like I mentioned, the mixed use is really attractive to developers right now. Housing is number one in terms of looking at these projects. Let me just tell you what we did for Clearfield, which is your neighbor to the south. And Clearfield has, they have the largest TOD spots. They have about 66 acres, give or take. And so they actually already have a developer. They have all of those elements that we talked about, and they're actually working to get some of the infrastructure done right now. They all went through that same process. And all of our process is basically just saying, we as UTA are addressing what the community needs and balancing it with the needs of a transit stop that will maximize the value of having that infrastructure there. So we don't have anyone at this time because we are not at that phase. We can quickly get there, but we're not there yet. So let me just, I hope that addresses probably a couple of your questions in terms of what you're asking. I have not heard of any verbal communications at this stage. I don't know candidly what some of your residents had in communications with past UTA dialogue. I have no idea. So I would be happy to entertain that. I would imagine though that if it didn't include development, it's probably not an option at this point. So if somebody said, well, UTA said they're just going to leave it as a parking lot, then that's not going to happen. So just to be clear on that one. You did mention one other thing, and that is about the parking. And Clearfield has an agreed upon process. So they have phased theirs out. Obviously, again, it's larger, but it's the principle could be very similar for Roy City. They phased it out so that when they get to a space where they no longer have sufficient parking, that part of the cost structure of a parking structure will be included in that. And they already have the footprint and they know where that's going to be. It has to be accessible to the transit stop fairly quickly for those individuals in your community who are using it as a park and ride. So it's usually near the tracks themselves. It's almost like right immediately east of the tracks line. And then of course it's not in the way of buses, but it's very close to that tracks line. And it would be a structure that would address the loss of parking as it currently exists today, and as well as any shared parking needs. We have found that the shared parking needs is a real attractive feature for developers who are going in to build an apartment building, for instance. And if they could have access to a shared parking structure, then it helps to, share their costs a little bit. And that is an element that I think when you look at any type of development, you're going to see that, especially on something that has this type of acreage. And so for instance, Sandy City has a stop at 102nd South, and all of those developments were phased in. And as it took up more parking, there was a parking structure that was created in that. And that element is actually almost built in. It's on phase 5 today. I think it's phase 5, that all of the parking is integrated within the entire system so that it's still accessible for the park and ride individual who doesn't live in the neighborhood. But that added element of shared parking means that it's really being utilized in a maximum capacity. So the first level is for UTA park and ride users. And then the other levels are for residents. But at night, those residents can integrate and move into it. And that's kind of the goal of having this type of shared parking structure. And again, parking per unit is obviously a decision that Roy City makes. And so we work with the city and we work with the developers when we're doing these negotiations. A lot of times when we put an RFP out, those are the exact negotiations that many developers have. Well, if I did this, could I then get a break on parking? Or if I have some other element, if I'm going to, let's say they wanted to try to use the Htrz and they want to do some type of tax increment capture method, then so the city says, okay, but here's our requirement. And we want to keep these types of units, you know, and truly affordable, like 80% AMI. And that's the usual discussions that you have with any developer that you're going to get into. And then we typically get 2 to 3 developers who respond. And then the city UTA sits down and evaluates those as from an RFP standpoint. Did they meet our objectives? Do they have reasonable requests? Is this going to fit in within our community? Is this going to address the needs for UTA? And then with that, you choose that developer and then you structurally work on whatever that design is ultimately. That was a long explanation.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question on the parking. In talking to other areas, not necessarily in Utah, but outside of Utah with some similar things, they say that oftentimes these places have limited parking, so it's only 1 per unit, per resident. But the reality is most of those people still have more than 1. And so the problem comes that they're either using up the parking that would be available for the park and ride customers, or they're parking all over the streets of the other people that are around. And that it's been a very big problem for them. I'm just wondering what you guys have, you know, discussed in that regard. It's certainly an old problem. What your plans or thoughts might be to help with that, where you're trying to require only 1 parking spot, but the reality doesn't seem to match up.
That's a good question. I'll tell you about a spot that we have down in Murray City, which is at it is called the Fire Clay District, and it is actually interestingly enough, it's an affordable housing project that was designed to have a percentage of affordable and a percentage of market. And with that, because they were doing that percentage of affordable and not just all market, Murray City said, hey, you know what? You don't have to have, you can have like 0.75 of a parking, parking space per unit. Like, and I apologize, that's probably not exactly accurate, but that's what it kind of ended up becoming for that very reason. It isn't a perfect science. I will definitely agree with you that there are some challenges, and our park and ride lot does get co-opted, if you will. And we have these discussions with those developers. I think, you know, Murray City, that particular unit was an earlier, you know, blend into that market, and it's not perfect. But that said, all of those units are still considered affordable. So they're, you know, the city has to deal with parking issues, and they're going to be issuing some tickets, and we have to deal with it as owners of the park and ride. And so we have to, every now and then we go in and do a blitz of parking tickets and say, you know, if you're not a UTA rider, and we haven't gotten to this conclusion yet, but it's been discussed about, you know, if you're a park and ride user, a legitimate one, should we just give you like a sticker or something? And how do we manage that? I totally agree with you. It's not a perfect science, but that said, that was the agreement that was reached between Murray and UTA both, and the developer. And so coming back to Roy City, I'm not going to suggest to you that UTA should just, on this particular map, we should just have 0.75 and you guys will just have to deal with it. We really want to make sure that we're coming to a consensus that has some value for your community, because you don't want to be saddled with, you know, years and years of people, you know, parking 3 blocks away because they don't have adequate parking. It really has to be a structure. And that's why we talk about a parking structure specifically, because we want to have some type of infrastructure that's shared that can still address that problem so that it's not spilling out into other neighborhoods. I know it's not perfect. I will say that South Jordan, our front runner stop at South Jordan is a pretty good again, shared parking structure. Again, the first floor is for UTA park and ride users, and then the second and third floors are for the, in this case, it's a commercial office building, two of them that are out there. It has had pretty good success, and then now, of course, it's COVID, so there's not an issue at all at this particular time, but long term, we think that's the way to go, is a shared structure.
And then I
Yeah,
have a
great
question.
comments. Let me ask a question if I can, along that same line. And I guess maybe more it's intuitive to the conversation. House Bill 433, Beth, got approved, and that allocated $300 million to UTA. The most significant component of that is the element that talks about double track. Now, I know there's some timelines you and I've talked about that'll push it out there a ways. But here's the question, and just, you don't have to spend a lot of elaboration on this. The best I can tell at this particular UTA station, UTA will need to probably acquire some property to do the double track. I don't know if you can actually fit it. Remember, Union Pacific is on the west side, and UT in this particular track actually is on the east side. To double track the east side, assuming you're going to carry a double track all the way into Davis and Weber County, there's going to be some land acquisition issues that you're going to have to consider as well. And can I assume whatever kind of development that we agree on collectively, and we're going to ask for residents' input as well, you've also got to factor in some land acquisitions to get that second track in. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct. Let me just, if you don't mind, I'll just take a minute to kind of maybe broaden that discussion a bit. So as the mayor indicated, we actually received about $334 million from the legislature this past session. Some of those are specified to different projects, like $12 million is for the S-line expansion up past east of Highland Drive, Point of the Mountain, Sharp Tintic, which is in Utah County. The bulk of it, the $300 million that the mayor is referring to, actually does go to the double tracking. But I want to add a word here that I think is really, really critical, and that's strategic double tracking. We have no intention of using all of that funding, because it wouldn't be enough to double track the entire system. But what we are doing right now, we've already hired a consultant to take a look at our entire system and figure out where we can find key locations to double track so that our trains can pass and not have to wait till they get to a station, which is what they currently do today. So 70% of our track is one track, and then the 30% is double track, but it's at stations. And we know that that's not sufficient, because basically you will, if you're in Davis County, you'll see a front runner train stopped in Centerville-ish, somewhere in that area, because it has to wait for another train. And that is one of the elements that we want to address. And so these consultants are going to go through and they're going to strategically double track these areas so that not only can we pass our trains, can pass each other mid-stop, but also so that we can incorporate and add in express trains. And express trains would be designed to get you quickly to a main location. So Ogden to Salt Lake, Provo to Salt Lake. We don't know where there'll be limited stops in between, and we don't know where theirs will be yet. And it will also increase the frequency of those trains. So instead of, right now we have 30 minutes on peak and 1 hour off peak. And then it would change that to 15 minutes on peak and 30 minutes off peak. And that's a different configuration entirely. And so if you can catch a train every 15 minutes, it really changes the game. We've noticed this structurally in the UVX BRT model, and we anticipate that will be very similar to the Ogden BRT, which we're already starting construction on. But again, strategic. We are not at this point going to double track the entire system. Okay. So I hope that helps kind of give you some perspective. Yeah.
I just want to make sure that at least for the council's understanding, whatever we decide to do in terms of approving the ordinance, it might very well be that the train station may be in a pause as they start to address the double tracking issues, if this is selected one of those sites, because there will be some land acquisitions that have to occur there before any type of development goes in. And so, and Roy's in a good spot. I would assume if Clearfield, if they've already built out some of that, then double tracking at that location could be problematic because it would impact existing facilities. So I guess we'll see how that unfolds, but just be aware, council, whatever decision we may choose to go with in terms of defining the zoning of this, we may not see a lot of activity at this site until UTA clearly gets a vision of what they want, how the Roy, in this case, the Roy Front Runner Station plays into that vision. And then if double tracking is occurring at this particular location, then that would have to be a factor in terms of that part of that property that existed there. So just recognize this may take some time, take years before we actually see any type of development that they can move forward with until we get some of this stuff worked out. So thank you, Beth.
Yeah, Mayor, just wanted to clarify one thing. So at the station, you do actually already have double track. So you
Yes.
have southbound and northbound trains. So the impact to your actual TOD site would not really be impacted by any double tracking. Now that double tracking will be just immediately beyond those stations potentially. And again,
Okay.
I do not know yet. And you're correct in saying that that's going to be something that will be coming up in the next couple of years, and we'll know more. And then we can actually start leveraging that dollars for federal dollars to start construction.
Okay, great comment. You're right. We do have two tracks because we do have a north and southbound on there.
Yeah.
Okay, other thoughts? Council, any other thoughts you'd like to talk before Steve steps up and continues the dialogue?
I have a question for Beth. Oh, I can't see who else is there, but Brian, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just wanted to ask Beth, based on UTA's history, what is their projected density per acre for any type of TOD? Meaning, what's their minimum and what's their maximum that they've kind of fell between with other projects?
That's a great question. So in the past, oh, sorry, did you have another point?
No, I just,
Oh, okay.
I try and save good questions for the end.
Nice.
You're so funny.
So, and that's a good question, because some of our density is definitely different. And in the past, the density has built up to itself. And density is a relative term because some of our stops are completely commercial. And so it's the commercial height of the building. And we have no, they can go as tall as they want, in our opinion. Obviously, that's a city, again, that's a city controlled element to that. But anywhere that there is housing, we have anywhere from like 25 units per acre to over 50. And that's, again, in the past. If we're talking UTA today and moving forward, we would like to see a minimum of 50 units per acre. Now, I know that makes people go, whoa. And I'm not saying that is like the set in stone, have to have it, that's it. The legislation that I referred to, the Htrz legislation, actually did have as one of those elements that if you do a tax increment capture model, then that density reflects also in the land use. So in other words, the community where that occurs and UTA have agreed that that's how they want this to look. And so the developer has to abide by that. That being said, again, if we're looking at the way that the growth is continuing to project, 50 units per acre sounds like a lot, but honestly, it's not even going to address all of our needs on housing. But again, I want to emphasize that this has to be a community supported project as well. We can't go in and say, that's it, Roy, you're gonna do 50 units per acre and we're gonna say that this is it, that's all it is, and you don't have any say. Structurally, that's not a way for us to manage our communications anymore, and we don't want to do that. We want to work on something that can really address the needs of housing and still reflect your own community, because we know how important that is, because we know that that's what your residents are saying, and your residents are part of this dialogue, and they recognize that change is coming. Sometimes they don't like it at all, but they also know that you as a council are looking after their interests, and we recognize that too. So we really want to shoot for a goal that's going to add a lot of value for housing in a TOD like this. But we recognize that, again, land use and zoning are the city's purview, and we try to work with that as much as we can. I think developers will push you more than UTA. So.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Diane, you had some other questions. Thanks, Brian.
Actually, that was one of the questions, so thank you. And then I was just wondering, are you encouraging some commercial in addition to residential in some of these smaller TOD areas? Because that may actually increase your ridership, whereas the residential will be actually lower for actual numbers. You know, you have more people per square foot in an office or something like that. I was just wondering what the philosophy on that was.
Again, that's a great question. It's a nuanced question too, because we look at this as, again, we want to be reflective of the community, but we also do want to encourage a mixed use thought process in this development. And that does allow for some potential, at least, main floor commercial of some size. It is going to depend, and we all know this, the size of the properties are going to vary. For Roy City with their, I want to say 18 acres. I'm sorry if I'm messing that up, but for the size of this particular piece, it would make sense to do a mixed use. If I were just like hey, I'm a developer and I know what can sell, that's what I would go for. I think that realistically, it is such a challenge because the housing element is so needed. And I've heard developers say, well, my commercial can sometimes sit, even if I subsidize it, I would rather just, make my money, get in and get out. And that is always a classic challenge. But I do think that ultimately having a mixed use component to it adds more value long-term. And again, I really think that if you're looking at this from a long-term perspective, which I think you are, you really want to make sure that you can incorporate these opportunities. I was telling the mayor this yesterday after WACOG. There's an apartment building here on our North Temple site for Front Runner, and it is, granted, it's in a slightly different location because it connects to tracks to the airport. So it's a big, huge apartment building, probably like 300 units. And then there's another building, different developer, but huge buildings. What they did is this one developer created this market on his main floor. And what that does is it really allows people to truly not have to use their car for every single thing that they do. You're 100% right. Sometimes your residents are not going to be able to use transit for whatever reason, where they work is just not served by that, or there's some other element that they need to do. But by having as many things as possible that are really add intrinsic lifestyle value, like a market, childcare, gyms, those are the three top things, aside from your housing and commercial, that really make a strong TOD. And they have this market that takes up about, I want to say about a third of that main level of this apartment building. And it is a huge success. And it's because you don't have to go buy a gallon of milk and get in your car to do it, right? That is a lot of value. It didn't happen immediately. That particular space probably sat for almost 2 years. I'm not going to say everyone's, not every developer can handle that. And I get that. And again, that's where we have to have these negotiations. But if you can plan for that for the future, I think it ultimately adds the most value to those residents who will live there.
Thank you.
Mayor, you're on mute.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, thank you. Great input. Good information. We're about 10 minutes away from having to close. At least at this moment, with now we got UTA's input in terms of what they think they'd like to see happen in this collaboration with Roy City and the Roy City residents. I think we had some vision there. That's perfect. I think we need to continue with Steve in terms of, okay, Steve, where do we go from here? Here's what I took. And I only heard 2 council members, but I think I'm going to ask the question, does the consensus of the council want to then change the station south from 40 to 35? Diane, I think you supported it. I heard Joe liked it.
I
haven't heard
would say
Brian.
everything in the hashed green is 35 because it backs up to houses and all along there and the other side of the tracks to not create the tunnel effect.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay. I think we got it. Brian, are you okay with that too?
I am. Yeah, I
Okay.
wish we could even think about going to 30, but that's probably just a wish.
Okay, Steve, go ahead. At least I want to walk away with this, and then we just need to take about 2 or 3 minutes at the end and talk about the last piece of what we want to do from here. So go ahead, Steve.
Just as a kind of a question, knowing that single family home can be 35 feet tall, I think leaving it the same height as a single family zone would be adequate. I think if we go down any farther, then it's going to be really difficult for developers to get to a 3rd story. The great thing, and Beth may look at this, is yes, the blue is UTA's property, but if we look at everything that we've got highlighted here and all of a sudden, they get units in there, I think it will exceed what UTA's desires is to have, so many units within walking distance where it's not just on their property, but it's elsewhere in the area that all of a sudden, yes, maybe UTA's property isn't the high density they were desiring, but within, 400, 500 feet, they can get that amount. So I think that's what's great about kind of how we're drawing this is, yes, they may not get their 50 units per acre that they, might want, but I think in relative terms of within a quarter mile, they get that.
Easy. Yeah, I agree.
I think that's what's great about this is we can say, yes, it's 35 feet here and yes, it's only, 60 feet there, but with a combination, we've succeeded to get UTA what they needed to be able to make this a successful stop.
Yeah, and it's all about ridership. And I think if we can get people, and I think the TOD document that UTA says that within a half a mile of the TOD, people will normally bike and walk. And that's perfect. And we can do some numbers to kind of figure out exactly what the population would be in terms of what that surrounding would be to help, facilitate the ridership, which is what we want to do. The purpose of this mass transit is to simply tell the people, leave your vehicles home, get on the mass transit. It's opened up entire the Wasatch Front and use that. It's relatively inexpensive and it's a great medium to move people around. And I think once this pandemic, and it seems to be just about over, I think UTA's ridership is going to boom again and even grow more as we start to work some of the other things that they're doing right now to make it easier to get around. So we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, and then to let Beth know, it is a mixed use ordinance we're looking at. Now, granted, I don't think there's going to be huge commercial at this location, but I think a small market, a small, mom and pop shop sandwich and stuff like that would probably be ideal. And we want to be able to allow that. Maybe someone has a small, for lack of better words, a small Walmart type store that goes in that's, bigger than a C store, but smaller than a grocery store.
Yeah.
We want to be able to allow it, but we also know that like the green and the red and orange, you're not going to get a lot. It's probably more in the blue where it's more right at the stop itself. So,
yeah. And do you have a question?
Could I just make a quick comment? I don't want to take too much more of your
Please.
time. I know I've taken a lot and I appreciate it. With the way that we look at this, we agree with you. We agree that when you look at this, not just from our land, but from the entire region, that area that you have highlighted in these colors, that really does expand the scope. And that really is ultimately the goal. And I wanted to tell you too, that I think that if you are looking at these spaces and you have in your head, hey, is there a way I could do some type of an active transportation access point, get some trails, make it a requirement for your developers, I think you can really enhance it in a way that will really be valuable. Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, great comment.
With DNRG trail right there, it's already done.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, council, other comments or questions? Diane, go ahead.
Can I ask Steve? I'm concerned a little bit. I'd like to look at the red section at 60 foot. When I was over there, I drove over there and walked over there and measured those elevations, both that and on the map. Could you give us some elevations along there and see if we think 60 foot is really what we need there? Because, as I'm looking at the foot droppage on that, we could end up with a tunnel effect again for those people as well. Most of those are back just a little bit, but I'm just wondering if you could look at that. Maybe we could drop that to 50 feet, still accommodate the people that are hoping to, proposals there. But so those elevations aren't as far down as I had thought, and we could really cause some concerns for those people as well, if you don't mind.
I can talk to our engineer to try to give us some topography issues or distances. I know with the tracks right there, it is more than 100 feet away before these properties begin. So, the tunnel effect isn't necessarily
right. It's not as
there,
dramatic. You're right.
Yeah, and the building. I mean, it's 100 feet everywhere, but I think on the south, because there's homes backing on both sides of it, there's more of a concern. Where on the north, they're just on one side. But yeah, I can ask our engineer to.
They're on one side, they're farther back and they're up a little bit higher, but I would agree. I would like to see what that is.
Okay.
We may drop that down 10 or so feet.
Yeah, I'll ask Mark.
Because, 4 stories may well be enough in that area. And so if we could accommodate that, I think that would be a very nice thing to check into. 4 stories, meaning whatever that, we understand what that really means.
Sure.
Thank you.
Now,
Okay.
I'll ask Mark, but hopefully he can get to it quickly. If not, we'll get it to you as soon as they can get it to us.
Okay.
Okay, council, real quick. You basically looked this, Steve and I and Matt have talked. It looks like this is all about height. Is there anything else in this document, if we can get the height worked out, that you feel like we need to have a conversation on? Because let me preface that because of the next question, a comment I'm going to make. Matt and I have talked. Morgan is helping us. Our plan is to have a town hall meeting. We'd like to get that set up in our next meeting, maybe within the next 2 or 3 weeks. Morgan's working that issue for us now. I think we need to get the people who are going to be impacted by this the most, or have a vested interest in this, to give us their thoughts. And I'd like to have a town hall meeting to invite them to come do that. Now, I know Steve has provided you a complete list of all the planning commission notes. That's purposely was given to you so you can look at all the comments that was sent in prior to this about a year or so ago. But I think because of timing and because we want to do this right, I think we do need to bring in the public one more time in a town hall discussion. We will not make it the decision in the town hall meeting, but we can talk about it, we can get input, and then bring all this together to finalize what we'd like to do. So 2 things I'd like you to consider. First, what other kinds of things in this document that Steve has provided do we still need to explore? We felt that the height was the big one. And is there other things? Would you mind doing me a favor? Send that into Matt, send that into Steve, of things you want to talk about. And then second is, I'd like to get some of that looked at and talked about before we get into the public meeting. Okay?
Mayor, I would like to just, make sure we go through the comments you've already sent out to us. So, I'd like to make sure we have time to at least go over that And then we can have our input on the stuff you've already put out.
Okay, I just know that we're going to, and Matt will go through that today. We're going to be going into budget work sessions as well. That, as you well know, will start up in our next meeting. But the key here is I'd like to make sure that we get these things defined, addressed, but equally important, because this one is hot, I'd like to get that town hall meeting going. So if you do have some things you'd like to talk about, send it to Matt and Steve. We'll incorporate that in our next work session. And then we really want to make sure that we're ready to take a town hall meeting and get the public's input on this. So we'll work towards that. Anything else before we ask for an adjournment of this meeting? Okay, hey, great input, Beth. Appreciate your great words. Obviously, you had some things that really was enlightening to us, and that was very, very important to hear that. And we're really appreciative of your input on that. And it was very helpful, very, very helpful. Thank you, thank you. So with that, then can I have a motion then to adjourn the work session so we can move into our city council meeting?
So moved.
Diane, thank you.
Okay.
Suppose we have a 5-minute break.
Yeah, well, there'll be a little bit of break. Do I have a second?
I'll
Yes.
second it.
Thank you, Ann. Okay, all in favor?
Bye.
Thank you,
Any
Beth. I
opposed?
appreciate your explanation and time.
Yeah, you did great. Thank you.
Council, I did just send out another email. For some reason, Zoom did not send out the council meeting email. So I just sent you guys out an email. So just check your email. It should have just come through. So we'll see you guys in a few minutes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.